The publication today of secret government reports into Victoria's most recent hotel quarantine failures caused the state to be locked down for a third time around Valentine's Day should serve as the final nail in the coffin of what's got to be the worst government this country has ever seen. Victoria, and I don't say this lightly, is a state riddled with incompetence, cronyism and cover-up. 3 lockdowns and 3 separate failed attempts at hotel quarantine. And as these secret reports published in the Australian newspaper today show, hotel quarantine under the Andrews government remains an ongoing shambles. Remember this boast back in February.
I'm very confident that we have a system that is worthy of being copied by others, and it is. If it was anything other than leading, and this is not about boasting, so this is just a fact. If it was anything other than one of the best systems, the AMA over in WA were calling it the gold standard. They're not terms I use, but that's what they said. If it was anything other than a good system, then I doubt very much that other First Ministers across the country would have agreed to copy it.
Fact, he says, it's spin, because only just after that, a handful of days after that comment, the state was in lockdown. Before February, you heard me, I argued that many of the systemic failures identified in last year's Coate inquiry had not been fixed, and that another quarantine crisis was only a matter of when, not if. Remember the $12 million spent on lawyers for the Premier, his ministers, bureaucrats, all to hide behind their I don't knows and I can't remembers.
No one's claiming ownership of the decision. There's just no one who says it was them. You're aware of that?
I am.
Do you know who it was?
No, I don't.
Because we really should know, shouldn't we?
Yes, it's one of a number of very important questions, yes.
You didn't even turn your mind to the question of how people were actually being detained in the hotels.
That's correct.
I don't know that I would have turned my mind to those matters.
When last year's Coate inquiry found that the Health Minister was in fact in charge of hotel quarantine, she said she wasn't, and she quit the Parliament in protest, replaced, of course, by the Police Minister. Well, the Police Minister's been off work, sick for months now, and the bloke acting for her as the pseudo-head of this hotel quarantine mess, well, he's done nothing to fix the problems identified in the Coate inquiry, or the latest problems, as detailed in today's secret reports that have been investigating the breakdown in procedures sparking the outbreaks back in February. Taking a closer look at what's in these secret reports today, and honestly, you couldn't make this stuff up. There's the General Manager of Victoria's Infection Prevention and Control Unit, so that's right, the head in charge of it all, an individual called Matteo Bush, who repeatedly broke his own infection control procedures, including defying a Defence Force request for a mandatory COVID test, as is required by all workers in these jobs, as well as breaching official infection control protocols. There's the health staff who broke procedures by vaping on site, which is a risk because it pushes aerosol droplets around. There's the maintenance staff who broke procedures by working on the site without being vaccinated. There's support staff who broke procedures by frequently failing to wear proper PPE. There's even a fair amount of confusion in these leaked reports about exactly what PPE is required in different situations. I mean, God help us. We're 12 months now into this pandemic, and these are fundamental errors that should just not happen. Then there's the bewildering array of individuals and steps and agencies involved in transferring anyone infected out of the hotels and into health facilities, and the breaches that seem to have occurred on an almost routine basis. Remember, this is Victoria. This is a state that killed 800 of its own last year, and it still hasn't learnt the lessons. That should terrify us all as we head into winter, with many of Victoria's most vulnerable, particularly older Australians, still unprotected. Remember Nebulizer Man, the father whom the Premier blamed for triggering the February lockdown? Well, a secret report out today says that the likely source of that outbreak was not him at all, but another hotel guest who was COVID tested in a corridor, again against the rules. But even though the government's report clears the man with the nebuliser, the bureaucrat in charge of the quarantine system, well, today she could not bring herself to accept that it was her team at blame and to apologise to this man and his family.
The advice from Public Health and the CHO in particular is that the nebuliser is still the working hypothesis for that matter.
You idiot, Emma Cassar, that's not what your report says. Now, don't for a moment think this catalogue of incompetence is mostly in the past either. In fact, nearly all of the failures enumerated in today's secret reports happened in the last month. There's no Premier in charge of Victoria, he's sick. There's no Minister in charge of hotel quarantine, she's sick too. There's a quarantine chief who won't say sorry and admit fault, you just saw her then. And now the individual in charge on the ground today, this bloke Bush, well, he's been stood down, on full pay of course, because he won't even follow his own infection rules. It'd all be faulty towers, wouldn't it? Faulty towers if it wasn't about a virus that was capable of killing. How is it Victoria can get it so wrong, so often, so catastrophically, and so repeatedly in Interstate? It's nothing like this. Now, I know tonight there's a case of community transmission in Sydney, but there's also a lot of confidence in their system to get on top of that case. Not so in Melbourne. Earlier today, I was talking to a senior government official in Canberra and I said, why on earth are you, the Morrison government, taking all the flack on hotel quarantine and these border closures with India when the whole reason the border's been shut is because state premiers fear their hotel quarantine systems can't cope? Couldn't defend it. One of the reasons why the PM doesn't seem to have enjoyed the same COVID incumbency boost as these premiers is because he's the one that keeps cleaning up after their mistakes. There's India at the moment. Earlier in the week, Scott Morrison was rightly copping criticism for blocking the public release of budget documents about the budget cost and the economic damage caused by Victoria's lockdowns. Again, protecting Daniel Andrews. The PM cops nothing but grief from the Victorian Premier, but repeatedly makes excuses for him and covers up for Andrews. Why on earth does he do it? Now, I don't know, maybe he thinks Victorians will stay angry when they head to the upcoming federal polls and punish Labor, because of course a federal election will occur before a state election, which isn't due until November next year. But it's pretty risky if you ask me, because it's all damaging the PM in the meantime. Surely today's reports show how much Australians deserve a royal commission into the management of this pandemic, the good, the bad and the deadly, including the ongoing hotel quarantine scandal in Victoria. Since when do we lose over 1,000 lives, spend $300 billion at a federal level alone and endure a year like no other without a proper inquiry into how it's all been handled? I mean, we've had royal commissions into banking, aged care, disability, bushfires. We've got one coming on veteran suicide. We even had one under Malcolm Turnbull into a youth detention centre in Darwin because he panicked watching the ABC. If we do all of that, why isn't there a royal commission into the handling of the biggest crisis we've faced since the Second World War? And why is the PM covering up for a Premier that should already have resigned in shame?